overnight tonight. Monday's weather. An additional 1 to 2 inches of rain 100% possible. Rain could be heavy at times. High near 60 degrees with wind gusts over 60 miles per hour in our area. Monday night, rain tapers off. Wind tapers off. Overnight low of 39. Tuesday, a 50% chance of leftover rain, mainly in the morning. Partial sunshine later in the day with a high of 46. Wednesday, mostly sunny, 41. Thursday, mostly sunny and 40. Friday, mostly sunny and 40. And Saturday, partly sunny with a high of 42.
We're here for you on the Talk of the Valley. ON Radio.
Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What happens when you run into Mothman? Do aliens come and take us after we die? Do all dogs go to heaven?
Welcome to the 1026th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app, from TalkStream Live, and on YouTube. That was Ben Eno, and I'm Valerie Lofaso, here to help things along. Paul is here with us too, coming in via Skype.
Hi, folks.
Well, it is open lines today, so everybody knows what that means. We take a bunch of questions, and we do our best to answer those questions, and sometimes, more often than not, they are open-ended, but we do the best that we can, and so I guess we'll hop right into it. And we'll start with one from our local listening area here in the beautiful Woonsocket, Rhode Island. And we'll start with that. This is Laura writing to us. Have you seen any evidence that animals in general, and pets in particular, have a heaven or hell? Would you like to start there, Valerie?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. That's a great question. And my answer today is going to be very different than it probably would have been, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. From what I have learned over my years of investigating, researching, and working as a medium, I don't believe in heaven and hell. I don't believe that exists for the energies of any souls, whether it's human or animal. That being said, though, I have experienced, and I know lots of people who have experienced animal hauntings, especially pets who are very special to somebody. They tend to come back and make themselves known. Sometimes they play with other pets in the home. Sometimes you just see them running by. So that would indicate that some conscious form of them does live on after they pass away. But I think where they go is, that's the question that we keep trying to answer over and over again, and it's a tough one to really nail down an answer for still.
Unfortunately, but I do think that is real. It is interesting, and I remember hearing a long time ago that not a long time ago. It was probably like in a lecture I heard forever ago. There was this Greek guy named Gregory from Palamas, and then eventually became called Saint Gregory Palamas because people didn't put of for whatever reason. And he had this really interesting idea because I think some kid walked up to him after church and was like, what happens to my dog when he dies? And he was like, oh, that's interesting. Keep in mind, this is like the 13th century. So he was like, well, it's like, people have souls. Animals have a different type of soul, so that something happens there, and it's like it's possible, and it was a really interesting idea, and I heard someone expand on it a little bit more at some point in time because there's this idea called theosis, which is essentially you become God became man so that man could become like God, and it's the act of becoming like God, right? And it's like, okay, cool, well, that's an interesting idea, but how does that work? And someone used the example of, you have pets, right? And you hang out with your pets, and you notice that they take on a lot of your characteristics. And it's like, I have two really goofy cats. One of them, they both like to sleep a lot, which I don't know what that says about me personally, but they like sleeping a lot. They're very friendly, but they're a little skittish and they have anxiety problems. So this is going to sound very weird, but that's very similar to me. And I'm a very friendly person, but I do, I can get kind of anxious about stuff and stressed out and whatever. And I look at my cats and I'm like, they do a lot of the same things that I do, and it's it's disconcerting. But through seeing that, it's like, okay, well, by us hanging out with our cats all the time, or whatever pet, they become more and more like us. And in a way, that's almost like sort of a pattern for that same idea. The more we hang out and do certain things, we become like that thing. And it's that sort of same idea of, we pattern our lives in a certain way, and then we have a certain result at the end of it. Whether it's heaven, hell, whatever, at the end of the day, I personally don't know. I'd like to think that there's some sort of like, our pets go somewhere cool. They've been good boys, girls, whatever, and you want the best for them because they become like a little extension of yourself and a part of your world and your environment. And it's like, I'll say this this is probably a horrible thing to say to my wife, but like every so often I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna be so sad when they die, and she's like, stop, don't say that. Because they matter a lot. They matter a lot to us. And at the end of the day, we don't really know, but we know the effect that they have on our lives, and our effect on their lives is very significant. So I can't give you a definitive answer one way or another, Laura, but what I can tell you is that, through participating in the world with your pet as your companion or whatever, as they become more like you, through, I don't want to say osmosis, it's not the right word, but you know what I mean. Through hanging out with you and kind of taking on those characteristics and expanding upon themselves in a way, there's that really interesting sort of portion to it that is patterned after ourselves. So perhaps if there is a heaven or a hell and they go in that direction, I'd like to think that there's something there, at the end of the day. And really, it just kind of comes down to, how you treat others, I suppose. And if, you're good to your animals, I'm gonna assume they'll be good to other people. I don't mean to laugh. It's just I'm trying to think of a way to like explain this where it doesn't sound too goofy. And it's kind of coming across that way, but, animals are kind of goofy at times. So I guess that's really the best answer I can kind of come up with.
It is challenging when you talk about animals, though. I actually have a story, if I can share it, that kind of, I don't know if this is going to back up anything that we've said or not.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
I had a cat who he was a fluffy orange part Maine Coon cat that I was very, very connected to. Like, he was my cat. And I was going through a period where he was waking me up every night, multiple times a night, meowing at me, pawing at me, climbing on me, and I was not sleeping well. And this was going on for weeks. And I was really, really tired and really, really frustrated that he was not letting me sleep. So finally, I reached out to a friend who is a trusted and skilled animal communicator and asked her if she would check in with the cat to find out what was going on, because I needed sleep and I was afraid of what might happen if I couldn't get a good night's sleep soon. And the story she came back with was that the soul that was in this cat in another life had been my daughter. And the cat, was reliving my death from when we were mother-daughter. And so he was waking me up to make sure I was still alive, is what she told me. And I thought that was fascinating. I didn't quite know what to make of it. But I sat down and had a conversation with the cat saying, look, this is a different scenario. I'm a different person. I'm young. I'm healthy. You have nothing to worry about. So please let me sleep. And that night, I finally got a good night's sleep. He didn't wake me up, and it wasn't an issue after that. So, I don't know what to make of that. It's just, I've always thought that was just too much of a coincidence. So
That is really interesting. I remember hearing somewhere, I think it was some, I don't know, I think my wife saw it in a video or something and was explaining it to me that, when cats don't sleep like we do, they kind of like take little naps or whatever. They sleep like 15 hours a day, but it's kind of in like little intervals, and there's like this interesting theory that cats consider us just big cats kind of living in their colony rent free. And they'll like, I know my cats, they like sleeping all over me, and it's adorable but also incredibly annoying. And my orange cat Linus will come up and he'll just like sit on me and just like stare at me and like purr and like lick my face like to wake me up, and it's very cute, but it's also incredibly annoying, and I'm like, dude, stop. But apparently cats think you're dead if you sleep for more than a few hours, so they get like really antsy, and so they'll climb all over you. And that's really interesting that sort of dynamic is played into it in such a way, because that does and it stopped, which is even more interesting because
Right.
it's interesting.
And it stopped that night. It wasn't like, it didn't take a couple days. It was after we talked, he was good.
So long story short, make sure you sit your cat down and have a conversation with them.
Exactly. Tell them what you want. Let them know your expectations.
It's just like any relationship. You gotta lay out the expectations, and in this case, it's just I need sleep, which is not too different from some other relationships. Anyway, we can move on to something completely different. And this is from Linda in Dallas, New Mexico, writing to us. Saying, I hear a lot about Bigfoot and UFOs being seen together or near each other, including on your show, but not so much here in the Southwest. So what is the connection, if any? Is Bigfoot an alien, a ghost, or are aliens giant, hairy, and smelly? Or are they close but no cigar? So what do you think, Val?
I mean, that's a great question. I've never been to the Southwest, unfortunately. I hope to get there sometime sooner rather than later.
It's neat.
But yeah, it seems like an amazing landscape. But from my experience, there is a lot of overlap of ghosts, UFOs, aliens, and even Bigfoot. We always joke, my circle of paranormal people, we joke about how, we all got into this for one particular thing. Like for me, it was ghosts. And once you do that, you go down the rabbit hole and find out there's 1,000 more rabbit holes, and they're all connected, and you never know which way is up once you go down these rabbit holes, because you do find that where there's a lot of ghost activity, there's often a lot of paranormal activity. Also, these are things that we may not have a lot of context for. So what one person calls a UFO may be what somebody else calls an orb. And, that person might consider an orb a ghost, and the other person an orb a UFO. So I think there's a lot of complexity with terminology and, trying to put into context these experiences that are outside of the normal and paranormal.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it is kind of hard to define your terms in this sense, because in a very broad sense, right, you could say that Bigfoot is an alien because it's something entirely quote unquote other from our known world. We'll put it that way, because it's, you could make the argument that there's a whole other portion of the world that we don't see. And there's this idea, I've mentioned it a couple of times on the show, and I might have mentioned it when we did our show about Mothman not too long ago, which is the idea of sort of society as being concentric circles, right? So in the center of the sort of city, right, you have sort of everything, in order, and then the further out you go from those circles, the kind of more sort of, disordered, chaotic, etc. They are, and then finally you get into like the wilderness where all the monstrous things live, because it's not too often. It's not entirely too often, but 9 times out of 10, you'll hear that, most sort of sightings of, any sort of, UFO or UAP, whatever alphabet soup you want to use, or Bigfoot or anything like that. Typically it's on the outskirts of society. It's on the outskirts in the wilderness somewhere, and this idea of the unknown kind of being there in this sense. And it's not too far-fetched to think that anything that's outside in the unknown could be any one of these things. And I think it's important that we find context, as you mentioned, because if you see a shimmering figure under a big metal ball outside, aha, an alien. You see a shimmering figure inside a house, aha, a ghost. And I think it's the personal experience is one that shouldn't be discounted, because really I wasn't there. I didn't experience any of it, and I think that's incredibly important. And to kind of get back a little bit off of this like little rabbit hole, I suppose it's the answer is kind of yes to all of those and no to all of those, because we really don't know much, and depending on who you talk to, you'll get a number of different answers. That Bigfoot is a biological entity that is just really good at hide and seek, and stays in the depths of the woods, which is it's entirely possible. You get sort of like anecdotal evidence of Bigfoot walking out of UAPs in a few different cases. You can make the argument that they're interdimensional creatures, as well as aliens kind of moving between the worlds in sort of a multiversal manner. Wow, really didn't mean to do that alliteration right there, but we'll keep it. And it's hard to define, because you could even argue that it could be a flap area as well, where there happens to be multiple different phenomena going on at the same time. It may not just be Bigfoot, but it could also be upright canine cryptids or skinwalkers in the American Southwest, or there are all sorts of different things that could be playing off of each other in sort of this sort of paranormal playground. Another alliteration, didn't mean to do that. But it's all these things that are kind of going on at the same time, and it's really hard to kind of break them apart, because they're all part of that same sort of web of interactions that we have. And like you were saying, Val, it's like you get into these for different reasons, but all these rabbit holes kind of lead down and connect. And it's true, and it's all part of sort of the same sort of thing. And there's this objective reality that's there that we can't quite see, and we all have subjective experiences of it. And we know that there's something going on, but how it's experienced by different people is how we're kind of getting it. And I think that's the important part, is that all of these are kind of a unified story of this kind of mythos that we've been a part of for the last 70, 80 years now, where we're trying our best to kind of use what we know to suss out the mysteries of the paranormal and these things that are on the outskirts of our society. And so one man's Bigfoot is another man's alien, depending on the context. And it's like we have these sort of loose terms. Like we know Bigfoot, as Laura said, is Linda, as Linda said, okay, giant, hairy, and smelly, right? But you could argue that perhaps there's also aliens that are giant, hairy, and smelly, and these very loose sort of categories that we've made for it that really only fit into very specific circumstances. And so it's hard to figure out exactly what it is, only because we don't have the right terms for it. And so we're doing our best to kind of suss it out, but there's only so much we can do. All we have is what somebody experienced, maybe some pictures, maybe some soil samples or something. But at the end of the day, it's it may not be experienced in the Southwest, but it doesn't mean there aren't other things that are happening as well. And I think that's kind of the key, is not to get hung up on, okay, well, you guys are saying aliens, UFOs, and Bigfoot are all kind of happening at the same time, but we're not having that. You could be having aliens, UFOs, ghosts, aliens, UFOs, canine cryptids, aliens, UFOs, and God knows what, dinosaurs. Who knows? It's not the first time we've heard it. It could be a lot of different things, and it's very easy to get hung up on. Well, it's like a flow chart. It's really not. It's kind of more just like you throw a bunch of stuff at a wall, and maybe sometimes it'll connect. And I think that that's the thing, is you look for the connections between the other phenomena that's going on, not just one thing, but all things.
Well, and speaking of connections, I feel like this is a good segue into the question from Phil from Savannah.
Oh, right. Yes.
Do you want me to read that one?
Yeah, please.
All right. So Phil writes, "Hello, Paul and Ben. A few weeks ago, I was awakened at 3:05 a.m. by a voice that clearly shouted, 'Stop haunting me.' I have never been awakened by a voice in all my life. This one sounded as if it were pleading. It projected a sense of being scared and not angry. Is it possible that I or we can be inadvertently entering other realms without knowing it at all? I mean, I have no intention of haunting someone from another reality. How can I stop bothering this guy? I am hesitant to try to talk to the voice because I do not want to have it attached to me. The world boundaries in Savannah seem to be rather thin." What do you think, Ben?
Well, I know exactly what my dad would say, and the answer is 100% yes. That you can definitely be haunting somebody in a different world without knowing it. You know, the way that the membranes tend to bleed into one another, it's entirely possible that one could be, haunting somebody else without them knowing it. I mean, I know my dad has 100% seen it. I'm vaguely familiar with it. I think it's an interesting concept. But the other side of the coin is, you can't really take it at face value either, because it could be something trying to trick you. It could be something else, something that's trying to engage you and get you thinking about something. Because certain things have happened to me where I can kind of point out that it's not. I don't want to say it's isolated. I think it's entirely possible that it could be, a parasite or something negative trying to, get your attention and get you involved and try and take advantage of you and lower your guard, et cetera, et cetera. Or it could be some poor soul that you happen to be haunting inadvertently. That's kind of the thing. We have to kind of keep a level head when it comes to this and not kind of take it at face value, because there should be some sort of discernment in the way in which you approach this. So, I mean, if the feeling is there that, perhaps it is pleading, it's not trying to trick you, maybe the course of action is to just kind of, meditate and project a sort of peace, or try and find ways to, sort of relax the environment depending on your spiritual persuasion. If you like saging, smudging, etc., maybe that's an idea. But personally, I personally wouldn't engage with it. That's just my opinion, only because, I don't trust things as far as I can throw them, because it's you can fall into traps, and I think that's kind of my 2 cents on it. What do you think, Val?
The sticking point for me in this question is that he was sound asleep and the voice, yelled to stop haunting me. So what would he have, how is him laying in bed disturbing somebody?
Oh yeah, good point.
I had an experience in a house. It was just myself and a man. And I got up in the middle of the night, shut the bathroom door, and heard a female voice say, "Hello," very clearly. And, in that case, I felt like I was disturbing somebody in another realm where, the wall between us was just thin that night, and they heard a door shut and were startled by it, but I was actively up and doing something. So this begs the question, what was he doing, if anything, to disturb this person? Or was it, as you said, something else trying to trick him? Because what else is going on in Phil's life? That's a great point. What else is going on in his life that could affect this?
That's a
is
good
a
point,
great
Dad.
question from Paul. Yeah. Is he projecting himself out of his body when he sleeps and he doesn't know it, and he is walking around in another realm? If that is something that he's doing, and it can be done inadvertently, but he can, before, when he gets into bed at night, put a sort of protective energetic bubble around himself and ask, that he, if I was him, say, please let me stay in my body tonight. I do not want to travel to other realms tonight. Put up a boundary, and have the strong intention, because intention is everything when it comes to this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's an interesting scenario that he experienced.
It is, and I can imagine that that's a little disconcerting, especially if you're, again, trying to sleep. I think that's sort of the unconscious theme of the show is sleep.
Seems that way.
Aha, I made a funny too. But on that note, it is time for our mid-show break, where we will definitely not be asleep. So we'll be right back on Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno with our wonderful guest co-host Valerie LaFaso. We'll be right back.
When you're thinking about a place to go out to eat with your family or the whole gang, or maybe something quieter for just the two of you, head over to ON Radio's website, wonsocketradio.com, and click on the restaurant guide. This gives you a listing of the best restaurants in the area. You can take a look at menus and possibly even make reservations. This is a great resource to see a bunch of restaurants all in one place. Remember, it's wonsocketradio.com and click on Restaurant Guide. And if you own a restaurant that's not already listed, call WOON Radio at 401-762-1240 for information on how your restaurant can be on the Restaurant Guide. Call Joe at 401-762-1240.
You can depend on us for public service. ON Radio.
You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno and our wonderful guest co-host, Valerie LaFaso. And we are taking listener questions on an open line show today here in Rhode Island's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. And we were just talking about Phil from Savannah, our loyal listener, who always sends in wonderful questions, and his kind of disconcerting experience with being awoken in the night by someone saying, please stop haunting me," which, the poor guy. I am so sorry, Phil. That is not fun. And now it dawns on me that, I wonder if this is an isolated incident or if stuff like this has happened in the past. I would be curious to know if there were other things going on as well. If there was any other sort of activity in your home, or, as my dad said, over Skype chat there, that, if there's anything else going on in your life that's affecting things. I think that, that's definitely sort of next steps is, okay, well, what else is going on? Good point, Dad. My dad just said, might not have been meant for him either. So it might not have been meant for you. Who knows, but keep us updated. That is something incredibly interesting that I think would definitely be on par with, the sort of the Savannah environment. And this kind of leads perfectly into our next question from Carrie in Red Oak, Texas. Wow, a lot of great segues today. Who writes, I have heard you say you should not try to communicate with ghosts or other entities, but what happens if they try to communicate with you? Do you ignore them, or what? What do you think, Valerie?
I think it's definitely a personal preference. I would say if you are going to respond, do so very, very carefully. Bottom line is, we don't know what these things are. We do know that there are harmful things out there that are trying to trick you and maybe don't have the best of intentions. Friend of all of ours, Andy Kitt, used to give this analogy a lot, that, whenever you do any type of spirit communication, or what you think is spirit communication, it's like being in the middle of New York City, opening up your window and shouting, "Hey, who wants to come talk to me?" Who do you think is going to respond? The normal people or the weird people?
Yeah, right. That's a good point.
But, so you have to be cautious. As speaking as a medium, I am still very cautious about what and who I am connecting with. I ask a lot of questions. I do have trusted spirit guides that I work with to help me with discernment, but there are things out there that are trying to trick us. And so communication should be done carefully, and responses should be taken, if you get any, with a big grain of salt.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. When I was mentoring with my my old mentor, who was Aztec shaman. His whole thing was, I'm going to paraphrase, and I'm probably going to do it very badly, but his sort of general overall sort of lesson that he taught me about anything that sort of comes from another place is you have to be really careful with how you interpret things. That's like, he was like, that's like the big thing, is interpretation. And I really took that to heart, because discernment is a skill not a lot of people have nowadays, and it's incredibly important, because you have to really like mull over sort of what you're getting, much as one kind of has to keep an eye on your thoughts and how you're feeling and things going on, and kind of being aware of yourself. You kind of have to be aware of how you're processing stuff. And I personally think that it takes a lot of training and discipline to be able to kind of pick apart messages, because sometimes it can lead to some real bad places. If you have this whole thing where, a great cosmic entity is taking interest in me, and that's really cool, and I'm like the chosen one, and it can like really like, it can really throw you in some real weird directions, and it does not go doesn't go great a lot of the time. And it can lead you down some real dark paths, and it's important to kind of keep an eye on yourself. And I think the best part, the best defense is to kind of know yourself, and know what you can be tricked by, and be careful of any sort of messages you receive, if you receive anything at all. My sort of thing is, if you have no training in this whatsoever, going out and grabbing yourself a ghost box or something and running out to your nearest graveyard is probably not the best thing that you should do, because that's probably not a great idea, because I kind of agree with Andy that it's just not great. And so I'm very reticent to tell anybody, yeah, go ahead and communicate with them. I mean, even with like Phil that we were just talking to, I was like, I wouldn't. It's like, take stock of everything else that's going on around you before you even do anything else, because that's the important thing, is understanding yourself and what's around you. And before, Valerie, I trust you, but I don't trust some random person who, is, someone's talking to me in the night, right before I fall asleep, and they're saying that, saying all these things, and it's like, I don't know, I wouldn't trust it, because it's, you have to really kind of be careful with the messages that you receive, and you have no clue who you're talking to. That's why I'm not a huge fan of Ouija boards, because it's like, you don't know who you're talking to. They can tell you all sorts of stuff, doesn't necessarily mean it's true, and if they do, and if it does happen to be true, can you trust it? And 9 times out of 10 you can't, because that can again lead to some very, very dark places. So that's kind of that's all I have to say about that. It's very Forrest Gump of me. But that's all I have to say about that. And that kind of leads us again perfectly into the next question, which is Carl from Worcester, Massachusetts, not too far from here. And Carl writes, your whole idea about parasites and other supernatural critters. There's a... we'll get there when we get there, Dad. Anyway, Carl writes to us, your whole idea about parasites and other supernatural critters is really cool. Well, thank you. It's not really cool, but thank you. It's kind of terrifying. If these are not really spirits, or at least not completely, can they and do they die? Would that include angels? What are angels? Would it be better during an exorcism to kill the demon instead of just kicking it out? That's a lot of really deep and pondering questions there. Would you want to start us off there, Val?
Yeah, and I'm gonna preface this by saying that I am not a scientist. I am not a physicist. However, I do believe strongly that, these entities, whatever they are made up of energy. And of course, what is energy? That's a very complex question that we probably don't have time to answer today. But, we do understand that this energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So I don't believe that a soul, an entity, a parasite, a quote unquote demon can be killed the way our human bodies can be killed. Can they maybe eventually break down and take other forms? Possibly. I don't know. I think potentially that's an option. But I rather think that all of these things that we encounter have a purpose. We can't always see the purpose. So while we might say, well, that thing was evil and we need to kill it, who are we to make that decision? I'm not sure that's up for us to make that decision, even if we know how. Which of course I don't think we do at this point. That's it's such a complex question. The angel part is interesting. I have encountered beings that I believe are some type of angel, and I would not do anything to harm them. They were powerful and beautiful, but not with any ill intent. What do you think, Ben?
Well, are you familiar with mantis shrimp?
I am. We had one in our fish tank at my day job, and it killed a whole bunch of really cool fish.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I learned something really interesting about them because their eyes are like, I think they're super interesting, right? They see 12 channels of color. And for reference, humans see 3. We only see 3 channels of color, but mantis shrimp see 12, including ultraviolet. And it's amazing because they probably see colors that we don't even know exist. I mean, the color blue didn't exist until about 2,000-ish years ago. Up until that point, everyone just kind of thought the sky was gray gray or white, and that was about it. And there's a really interesting experiment that anthropologists did where they went to these remote tribes in, I want to say it was Africa, and they brought along the color blue, and they were showing it to them, and they were like, this is blue, and they were like, what do you mean? That's white. And they like didn't quite get it, and it was super interesting. And this is important because I think one of the things that I know this may differ from you, Father, and I apologize. I think that just as we don't know how a mantis shrimp sees things, we do not know, how an angel exists or parasites or demons or what have you. There's no way to really preface it. I mean, angel at its basest definition is just, a word for a messenger. And really the only person in history who even attempted to define them was this guy named Pseudo-Dionysius in Greece in like the, I want to say it was in like the 1st century. It was a long time ago, and he had these really interesting categories, but like each one of them was just like, very vague, and they had to do with like the virtues, and is oddly very influenced by Aristotle. I'm going to take a swing and a guess at. So, but it's interesting because they weren't like, people in a sense. We do our best to kind of describe them through art, which is, one of the 4 ways that we, organize reality. But at the same time, it's like, just as we don't know what a mantis shrimp sees, we don't know what it's like to be an angel, a mantis shrimp, a demon, a parasite. They're loose definitions for things that, we all experience from time to time. And it's a part of our existence because these are things that have sort of recurred throughout human history, right? One man's parasite is another man's demon. And how it's approached, I don't really know if there's a way to destroy them. I don't, not that I know of, because again, I'm just a human. I don't know what it's like to be an angel or a demon. I have ideas through stories, but no clue. It's like that whole thing by Thomas Nagel, the philosopher in phenomenology and how we experience things. Like, he wrote this whole book called What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And essentially, he came to the conclusion that, well, we don't know what it's like to be a bat. All we know what it's like is to be a human consciousness in a bat body. And so, we can do the bat things like fly around, use echolocation, but we don't know what it's like to be a bat. We just know how to be a human in a bat body. And it's like, oh, cool, I'm a bat. And it's like, well, I'm pretty sure bats don't think that. They probably just and that's really it, and eat bugs and sleep during the day. That's really all we know about them. Well, we know more than that, but the base level is this is we don't know what it's like to be them. So I think that's a very important thing is we to recognize A, how little we know, and B, how little we can probably know. All we know is what we've experienced of them. And, personally speaking, my experiences are a little bit more subtle in a way, at least recently. And I think that comes down to just life experience, because I don't go out and look for the things, I don't find myself doing as many cases as I once did. So it's just kind of like a part of daily life, personally, anyway. So I believe that there's really I don't really know at the end of the day. Can we destroy them? Do we even understand what exorcisms are? Different traditions do different things. And I think at the end of the day, it's like understanding our own sort of cosmology is very hard to do, because everybody kind of interprets things differently. I mean, the patterns of them are the same. The sort of loose framework is relatively the same if you kind of look around. But we all kind of experience it differently depending on your cultural background and what you've experienced and all of that stuff. So I mean, I don't know if they can die. I would assume that. No, I can't really assume anything. That's not really fair to do, because I have no idea. And I think that's really all I can say about it is, just as I don't know what it's like to be a mantis shrimp, don't know what it's like to be an angel, demon, parasite, etc.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, fair enough, as they say. Yeah, so this is really, really, really interesting. But I guess, actually, before we hop on to the next question there, Val, I'm going to give you a little bit of time to tell us about yourself, books, where people can find out more about you, etc., etc.
Sure. Thank you. The best place to find me right now is on Facebook. I do have a work in progress website, but on Facebook, you can find me under Valerie Lofaso, author and empathic medium. I have 4 books in the Tangled Web of Friends young adult paranormal fiction series published. They are available on all online booksellers. They are available in ebook as well as in print. And I do have a workbook for anybody who is an empath who is interested in developing their intuition. It's a do at your own pace workbook for developing your intuition as an empath. That is available only through me. So reach out to me through Facebook if you're interested.
Neat. Well, I guess that kind of leads us perfectly, well, sort of perfectly, into our next question. So much for perfect segues. We're doing our best, though. So this is from Megan from Boardman, Oregon, which is kind of neat. This is the podcast stats say that we have 3,413 listeners out of a population of 4,500, which is kind of neat, kind of cool that 3/4 of a town listens to us. So many thanks to Boardman, Oregon. Megan asks us, Paul and Ben and Valerie, I love your books and your show, and many of your words haunt me. I think about your very scary statement, and I can't remember where I heard you say it, but the statement goes as follows. That the human race could have been engineered as food for parasites, that we are a cattle race. This is depressing, but I wonder if it is all too true given what we are seeing around us in the world right now. It seems like the mistrust, hate, suffering, and general negativity is perfect to sustain parasites. It is like we are made to feed them. Can you all comment? What do you think, Val?
Oh, that's a heavy statement right now.
Yeah, we like to keep it light, huh?
Yeah. But I appreciate the question. I personally, I don't think that we are necessarily created to be food for them. I think it's evolved to be that way, but I do think that we have a certain amount of control over how much we participate in that. I am a believer that happiness is a choice, and you choose it, and by choosing it, you look for it, and by looking for it, you see it more and more. And I think You know, I think even Paul has told the story of using a joke book to, you know, work against some of these entities, you know, because joy and laughter and happiness, you know, that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for the depression, the infighting, you know, the backbiting, you know, all the negativity that is happening. But that being said, I also, I'm going to put on my optimist hat here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that the majority of our world is as negative and awful as it seems. I think that the negative side of things is just loud. And so it seems like there's more of it. But I think the good, the kind, the joyful, I think there's a lot more of that. And I think we are winning, personally. That's where I'm at with all of that.
Well, I'm gonna put a slightly different spin on things. I think that the statement that that Megan here is saying there's a little bit of context that's missing from it, and the theory comes from our book Behind the Paranormal: Everything You Know Is Wrong, which is that you go to the British Museum. And there's this whole section of like gods and goddesses or whatever, and then you go to this other room and it's all these ugly, weird little backyard deities or whatever, and you know, asking for human sacrifices and stuff. And it's like, who could love, you know, a god like that? And the theory was that, you know, that parasites or whatever wormed their way into human culture and asked for things and controlled things, etc., etc. And I remember hearing my dad saying that and getting kind of into that, and I thought about it for a really long time, and I spent a good portion of time, you know, maybe a year or two ago, where I was getting really into like ancient, you know, cosmology in like the Mediterranean, because it is really kind of fascinating, especially if you listen to anything from like, you know, the Mesopotamia or anything like that, the Assyrians. Like our boy Hammurabi, right? You know, everybody remembers him for the, you know, the Code of Hammurabi, and he had this big, you know, monolith that was like, you know, eye for an eye, blah 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 blah, and it was like a huge deal. But the thing about Hammurabi is that, you know, he's mentioned in a couple of other historical texts, up to and including the Old Testament, and he essentially, you know, there's this whole other thing going on behind it where there were these sort of entities called the Anunnaki that supposedly came up from the ocean, and they were these fish-headed people, very Lovecraftian. That kind of gave him advice and were like, yeah, you should do X, Y, and Z, and we'll give you great power and all of that stuff. And he was like, okay, sick. And so he went off and was trying to conquer a bunch of things, and ended up getting kicked out of, you know, wherever he was later on in time. But this isn't the only time that we hear stories of this, you know, the gods coming down and messing with people, or like, you know, appearing and doing certain things. And you wonder, like, okay, well, you know, you hear stories of like Zeus or Hercules, and they don't sound like good people. You know, it's like Hercules like murdered all of his children, and it's nothing like the Disney movies. You know, saying, you know, they all kind of sucked, really, at the end of the day. and you wonder, because you're like, wow, how did people get into this? And you think about it, and it's like, well, you know, what did we have to gain from it? And the idea was that. And I heard this in a really fascinating lecture series that was talking about, you know, why did they have statues of gods and goddesses? And there was this ritual that was done that was called the opening of the nostrils. And it was pretty much universal throughout most Mediterranean cultures. And you could see it in a lot of other places as well, where essentially, you know, they did this ritual where they would burn certain things around these statues. And the idea was that they would catch these spirits and they would inhabit the statue. And so they would then, once they captured said spirit, right, they would then have to take care of the statue, clothe it, you know, feed it. And, you know, it's like, well, how would you feed that? And that's what the burning of like food and stuff was for, cakes and all that. Because the idea was that, you know, if you're wandering around the desert and you encounter some cosmic entity and you don't want to die, you know, you offer it food. And the idea was that they ate through smoke. That was like the whole thing, which sounds dumb, but if you think about it, why do we smudge? You know, why? Like, what's the point of burning incense? You know, it's like it's still there, but you know, it's like, okay, well, you know, they must have been like crazy, or they were just seeing weather and stuff, and it's like, well, no, you know, what did they get out of it by doing all these things? They got control. And that was the thing, because heroes back in the day were not heroes because they were good people. They were heroes because they exerted control over the world. So guys like Gilgamesh or, you know, Julius Caesar, it's like they weren't considered, you know, heroes because they were good guys. They were heroes because they, you know, exerted their control over the world. And that's really important, because I'm getting back to your question here, Megan, because it sounds like I'm veering way off course. I would say that as much as it is that I wouldn't say that we were engineered for it per se, I would say that there's a temptation for us to do that in exchange for something. And the exchange is a promise of power, right? And it's like, you know, we experience this on a day-to-day basis, and, you know, you can arguably call it your conscience, which is like, okay, well, you know, I could be a nice guy and let this guy go in traffic, or I could just kind of say, no, and just keep going forward. And, you know, it's little decisions like that where you're like, oh, well, that's just a moral conundrum. You know, it doesn't really matter. And it's like, no, you're exerting control over your world, which we all want to do. You know, deep down, what we're trying to control what little bits of reality we can. You know, we have these, you know, fanciful little smartphones, and that's essentially its whole job, is to help us exert control over reality in exchange for what? Our time, our energy, and all of these things are exchanges for power. And I would argue that with parasites, it's the same deal, because you exchange a sort of, you know, willingness to give up a little freedom for a little bit of power. You know, whatever that power may be, you know, even if it's just, you know, oh, cool, a cosmic entity is paying attention to me and they're making me feel good about myself. And, you know, but you're giving up your time, your energy, you're giving up, you know, a portion of your life to an entity that is feeding off of it. And what's the difference between that and sacrificing something to, you know, an idol of Zeus? You know, if you think about it, it's really not that different. So, again, another example of how, you know, humans are not very different than when we used to be. So the idea here is, I don't know if engineered is correct. I would say that it's more of a choice. And it's been a portion of our being since day one, which is, okay, well, we can kind of allow things to work the way that they should, and we can step back and relinquish control and feel good about it. Or, you know, we can try our very best to sacrifice certain things to gain more control. I mean, it's like, you know, you listen to like celebrities and such, which are the modern day heroes in a sense, right? You know, they're not very great people, but they've, you know, acquired wealth, power, and a certain amount of control over the world. And what if they talk about the sacrifices they make? You know, it's the same difference. But in this case, you know, maybe they don't realize that there's some sort of cosmic entity behind it. We don't know, you know. But I think this idea of a cosmic entity that we sacrifice things to gain power from it, you know, that sort of very basic pattern is still there. And yeah, that same temptation is still there. And, you know, it's like, even if you want to call it addiction or something like that, because there's a reason that liquor is called spirits. And it's that whole idea that, you know, we give our time to our effort to something that could very well be taking more from us in exchange for something. You know, that's kind of a wandering, meandering answer to your question, but, you know, I think it's a lot more broad and far reaching than just, you know, good entity want good thing for you, bad entity want bad thing for you. A lot more shades of gray in there. And I think at the end of the day, we all have the capacity to do good or bad. And, you know, I think more often than not, people try to do good. Yeah, as much as you hear otherwise, which may or may not be an encouragement to do the latter. But, you know, I think it's important that we try and take control of the things that we can, which is ourselves, and learn more about ourselves rather than giving our time to something that, you know, will eventually destroy us. That's that.
Took the words right out of my mouth, Ben.
We do the best we can here. But on that note, we probably should wrap up because we're coming down to the end of the show. So there are a number of great books by our friend Nick Redfern for sale temporarily at dowsersouthwest.com/Greater New England UFO Festival, or sorry, Greater New England UFO Conference. And that's at our website, behindtheparanormal.com.
And you can visit that very website, behindtheparanormal.com, where you can find nearly 1,200 hours of regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WOON AM and FM. Also hear many of these broadcasts on the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
Well, on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, we'll rebroadcast one of two of the Rendlesham Forest case, A New Look with Gary Hesseltine, and we're just about out of time. That was Valerie LaFaso, my dad, and myself. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul